Welcome to CivilNet. Joining me today from Washington, D.C. is Aram Hamparian. He is the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America. Aram, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here, Maria.
ANCA is one of the most powerful Armenian lobbies in Washington, in the United States. And for decades, you have been working diligently around the clock to ensure the recognition of the Armenian Genocide, to ensure that the President of the United States acknowledges and uses the word genocide, and you do also many other things, certainly. But because we are now in the centenary, the much anticipated 100th year of the Armenian Genocide of 1915, I want to have this conversation with you to talk about what should our expectations be. Now, if we look at what's been taking place or what is going to be taking place, there are conferences and books being written and films being made and commemoration ceremonies taking place probably in every city that there is an Armenian, and not only. But in fact, this 100th year, can we expect something to change?
It's an excellent question. I think it's a question on the mind of every Armenian and every friend of Armenia around the world. To understand the issue, we view it in a bit of a different context, or a bit of a larger context, which I'd like to explain. The ANCA is part of a global movement, the Haitad Sharjun, the Haitad movement that is, exists around the world. Our concern, first and foremost, is for the survival and long-term viability of the Armenian nation. We have a global perspective, a 360-degree view of what it will take for Armenia to survive and thrive in the 21st century and beyond. We view the genocide in that context. We believe that a just resolution of this crime is, of course, at a moral level, an appropriate thing to do. It's a fitting tribute to those whose lives were lost. But even more importantly, it is about the future security of the Armenian homeland. Armenia cannot be safe, cannot be secure, as long as it is bordered by an unrepentant and overarmed perpetrator of genocide. So, as you may have heard before, the most we as Armenians, we're very tied to our history, but ultimately the most important chapter in our history is the chapter yet to be written by generations yet unborn. And that's why we're focused on the genocide issue, because it's a future-oriented issue. We need to have the elements of viability to survive, going forward. That being said, when we look at the centennial, sort of think about the framework, the sort of the intellectual construct of the centennial. Ultimately, our greatest ally, the greatest ally of truth, is light, and the centennial is an opportunity for light to shine upon this issue, for people around the world who did not pay attention before to start paying attention. So it is ultimately a tool, right, or an environment in which there will be vastly more attention to the issue. The enemy of this issue is darkness, and it is in the shadows that our issue is attacked and set back, and very often, too often, betrayed. So the centennial is an opportunity to bring our issue, right, from its current state of attention worldwide to a higher state of attention. Does that mean that the fundamental the correlation of forces, let's say, between the forces of denial and the forces of justice are fundamentally going to change? Of course not, right? The battle lines have been drawn, and they've been drawn along generally the same lines for some decades now, with the Turkish state seeking to deny the truth and obstruct justice, and the Armenian nation seeking to assert the truth and secure justice. So no, I don't think things will change fundamentally, because the geopolitics just typically don't change in radical ways. You don't see very often sharp departures, but you do see pivot points where one side or the other can gain an advantage, and the centennial is an important milestone in that regard.
Yeah, speaking of light and darkness and the political expediency versus the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, I mean, as Armenians, we know firsthand, the choices that are often made at our expense. You have struggled, Armenian organizations, community centers, lobby groups, the ANCA has lobbied, as I said, for the recognition, especially for the President of the United States. Will Obama change the paradigm?
That remains to be seen. Ultimately, that's our best intelligence, is that this is actually a decision that will be made by the president himself. A lot of other policies dealing with Armenia get staffed out. They're resolved by the State Department or by the National Security Council. This is on the president's desk, and we've had very senior discussions, and they've all led us to conclude that this is a call by the president, and we don't know what he will do. We do know that there'll be a lot more attention to his judgment, and I think that there's certainly a side of any president that would not want to be seen as betraying a pledge or falling on the wrong side of a moral issue. Maria, you raised a good point about the morality of the issue, and certainly there's no shortage of moral arguments we can make on this issue, or factual evidence that we can present. But there's also the practical side, which is that there have been repeated failed attempts to bring Armenians and Turks together by going around the genocide issue. And they have failed because that is the central issue that exists. Let's say this, if there is an obstacle to the improvement of Turkish-Armenian relations, it is the unresolved nature of the Armenian genocide. The practical move, not just the principled move, but the practical move for the US or anyone else, for Europeans or anyone else, is to say that of course the genocide happened and there are consequences today. They have all been borne by the Armenian side. We need to have a more equitable distribution of those consequences. And that really boils down to a just resolution of this crime. Does that mean Armenians get everything we want? No, but it does mean there needs to be a resolution and that the two parties need to come together in a post-denial environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you raised this issue. I spoke with Professor Taner Akçam a few days ago, and he raised this issue, saying that the recognition of the Armenian genocide for Turkey is not about democratization. It is not about freedom of speech. It's about ensuring justice for the Armenian people, and that's the starting point from which any discussion with Turkish colleagues, counterparts, organizations, civil society must stem from. I mean, it has to become part of Turkish identity as the Holocaust has become part of German identity. And this is sometimes, as Armenians, we fail to come to a unified position on this. So it's an important point that you raised. But I want to talk about something that you spoke about a few minutes earlier about the new generation, about the future. I think that it is also important that 2015 is not the end-all and be-all of this process, that life will continue beyond 2015. So what is the message for the next century? What would be your message for the next century, for the Armenian nation and for the Armenian homeland?
Sure. In every generation, stretching back something like 4,000 years, Armenians have stepped up and done what's required of them to hand off their civilization to the next generation. It hasn't been everybody, but it has been enough folks who've served and sacrificed and viewed themselves not simply as consumers of Armenian culture, but as the guarantors of Armenia's survival. And our message, and the folks we tend to work with the most, are those who feel that sense of responsibility. You say, look, I'm not just a passenger on the Armenian train. I'm shoveling the coal, or I am driving, or I'm doing something to be part of the solution. So I guess the solution going forward is find your place, right? For many in the diaspora, it's sort of a protect Armenia paradigm, right? Where we focus a lot of our efforts on the threat, for example, that Turkey or Azerbaijan represents to Armenia. For folks in Armenia, the challenge might be to build an economy, to build a fair society, to build a democratic future, to a society in which opportunities exist at home, so people do not feel the need to leave, to emigrate out of the country. So I guess once an Armenian feels in their heart that they're somehow responsible, like they're an owner of the Armenian enterprise and not just a consumer of the Armenian culture, I think then they'll find their place. And everyone, it's going to be different for everybody. My particular path led me here, but everyone's path is equally valid.
Right. There are so many questions I want to ask, but because our time is limited, I will try to limit myself if I can. The ANCA sometimes has come under criticism for being focused solely on genocide recognition, and it appears that the ANCA will use any means necessary in order to, keep it in the global conversation. It would take it to any platform, questionable or unquestionable. What would you say to those detractors?
First of all, I don't consider it a criticism that we seek to end the denial and obstruction of justice for a genocide. That's a compliment. I'm glad that people think that we're focused on that, but we're not just focused on that, obviously. Our North Star, the guiding principle of the ANCA and the Haytat Shajum worldwide, is the survival and long-term viability of the Armenian nation. We consider a just resolution of the Armenian genocide to be a critical component of that, but just a component of that. So is the freedom of Artsakh. So is the sustainable economic development of Java. So is the future of Armenian communities in the Middle East, the U.S.-Armenia relationship, including the trade relationship, the military relationship, the political relationship. All of these are pieces of the puzzle, right, that contribute to Armenia's viability. The heavy work, the heavy lifting is done by the soldiers of the Armenian army, the citizens of the Armenian state who are building an economy and a future upon our ancient land. But there's a strong supporting role for Armenians worldwide. And we view it in this holistic context. Like, what can we do that will be the most helpful to Armenia? The genocide is part of that. Economic development is part of that. Artsakh's freedom is part of that. I'll give an example. We have pushed very aggressively, and hopefully we'll soon see the results of this effort, for a trade and investment framework agreement between the U.S. and Armenia to help facilitate the growth of trade and investment between these two countries. We think that would provide an important balance. We think Armenia would have, for example, more strategic options in dealing with its own neighborhood if they have a better trade relationship with the U.S. That's an important part of our agenda. We view it, but that doesn't mean we're fixated on trade. No, it means that we consider trade part of the equation that will lead to Armenia's survival and long-term viability. The genocide fits in that category. Trade does. Economic assistance does. The Karabakh issue. All these issues, they fit into the framework, right? So this alignment with Armenia's future.
You know, I've been asking this question of several of my guests when we are talking about the recognition of the Armenian genocide in this centenary year. It seems that our conversation, the discourse, has shifted away from solely being focused on recognition, and now we're also talking about restoration. We're talking about compensation. We're talking about restitution. We're talking about return of properties, return of land. Is this a fair statement in your opinion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our goal is, let me say this, we seek truth, but truth in the service of justice, right? We want justice, but not justice just for the sake of justice. It's not a fixation upon the idea that things need we need to address past injustices. No, justice in the service of security. So truth is vital because it delivers justice. Justice is vital because it's an element of Armenia's survival, its viability. Maria, let me offer a thought. Just give a couple of examples of the very profound connection in international relations between recognition of wrongs and remedies of those wrongs. If you look at, for example, the South Africa freedom movement, right? There was an important element of securing international recognition, ultimately recognition by the guilty party, in this case, the apartheid regime, and then ultimately the remedies fell into place. The same can be said, for example, of the struggle against tobacco and cigarette smoking, right? There was first a recognition worldwide that cigarette smoking is bad for you. Then the tobacco industry itself recognized their wrongs, and then remedies were put in place. The same can be said of global warming, right? For many years, there was outright denial of global warming. Then came global recognition. Then ultimately, the industry came around, at least rhetorically, to the view that yes, they are contributing to harm to the planet, and then remedies were put in place. So the recognition and remedy tend to, in our view, be part of the same continuum. They're from the same cloth. It's not as though you can care about recognition or care about the remedy, or you can care about what President Obama says and then the justice that we deserve. They're not separate things. They're one contributes to the other. And there are so many examples of that, and very few examples in which justice sort of is parachuted out of the air into an environment in which the proper recognition has not been established.
Well, certainly not to think about. A lot of work ahead for the Armenian nation, for the Armenian homeland, and for activists in Armenia and in the diaspora. So, Aram, thank you for joining us, early morning Washington time to talk to us about this very important centenary year for the Armenian nation.
Thank you so much, Maria, for having me on your show and for all your great work.
Thanks. I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America, Aram Hamparian. Stay with CivilNet.